Welcome back to Season 5 of the Science Hat podcast. My name is Madeleine Williams, Healthcare Analyst at Canaccord Genuity. I'm joined by the Executive Chairperson of Clarity Pharmaceuticals, Dr. Alan Taylor. Thank you, Alan.
Thanks, Maddie. Great to have you here.
Yeah.
Wonderful opportunity to get together. Another amazing analyst in our local market. So last time it was Mel. So fabulous interaction. And as you know, we can discuss anything you like.
So you've had a lot of activity recently, particularly in regards to the 64 copper SAR-bis PSMA product, which is the prostate cancer diagnostic. So there's multiple trials going on. Recently completed the co-PSMA head-to-head trial, and the two phase 3 trials, Amplify and Clarify, are currently ongoing, with Amplify having completed recruitment recently. So maybe just to start off with, just sort of a high-level overview of the strategy as it relates to the diagnostic, and then sort of when we can expect those trials to complete and what's sort of ahead in the next 18 months, 2 years.
Yeah, fantastic. An overnight success. It's co-PSMA, or sort of the building from SAR-bis PSMA. The decisions made, as we keep saying, 7 years ago, 8 years ago, of making that new molecule because ours was as equally as bad as everyone else's, is really paying dividends now. We knew the answers to the questions that we're asking before we asked them because we did that work. And some people view it as arrogance, that we had this arrogant view of the market, that we knew, the difference between us and co-PSMA, obviously in that trial with gallium. Gallium was just something that we could control to use as a control in the trial. Really, co-PSMA was looking at how good our product is at a very difficult to treat or image group of patients. We know the standard of care is nowhere near it. We can structure any clinical trial we like and we'll be superior. As confident as we are of the sun rising tomorrow, our product will be better than standard of care.
And when you say superior, what are you specific? What's the biggest factor to look at?
The ability to detect lesions. Now, when we talk cancer diagnostics, and people have heard me say this before, a cancer diagnostics efficacy is its ability to diagnose cancer. There's no trick words in that. It's not about a 1 hour image. There's nothing in medicine that says you got to do a 1 hour image, a 4 hour image, a next day imaging. The thing in cancer diagnostics is your ability to diagnose cancer. And running these clinical trials, we already had the evidence in Propeller, firstly, in the same patient, same lesions, head-to-head with gallium PSMA 11. Cobra was different. We wanted it a little bit different. They can use any standard of care they liked, imaging, and then we went head-to-head with that. And there was a cohort of patients in that we were detecting lesions not even 6 months later these products were finding. So when we're heading into co-PSMA, and we had a reach out from a world regarded, very well regarded in that context, but world KOL, to do a 50 patient trial in our own neighborhood of Sydney. Of course, we said yes. It doesn't matter then about the clinical trial itself, even though that was incredibly well controlled. There was a fantastic trial to run. We can measure against, under any conditions, we'll be better than those products. It's like, if I have a sporting analogy, and I know you're a Melbourne person, in Sydney, where rugby league is our dominant theme. The Penrith Panthers are the strongest team in recent history. They've done the hard work. But for us to give that similarity, and they've won 4 grand finals in a row, and they're phenomenal, but the similarity is very different. It's not like 2 first-grade football teams competing. It's like Penrith playing the under-7s. They were always going to win. There's never going to be any doubt. And they're going to win by a big margin. And when we're looking at that efficacy now, we're looking at everything that we see is usually 2 to 3 times better. We've just shown it again, 2 to 3 times better. We saw it in Cobra, 2 to 3 times better in the number of lesions in a direct head-to-head same patient's image with standard of care. We saw it in, when we looked at all 50 patients, we saw that result come out. And so that continues to give us absolute confidence in it. I don't like to be overconfident, but as I said, now we've got such a body of evidence, such a wall of evidence for these other groups. And we've done it from day one. because we built a product like theirs, as I said, and it was equally as bad. We made our product was better. Now we're going to the market. Amplify recruited very quickly. Phenomenal result, right? On the backdrop of all of these standard of care imaging agents there, or the ease of 1 hour imaging time point, doesn't matter. I don't know a cancer patient that doesn't want to be able to find their cancer.
Yep.
So then we can have immediate treatment options. And it doesn't matter about the PSA levels that we've seen in Cobra. We're just trying to do things better, and we have done. We see such greater SUVs. We're able to identify these lesions better. It's a fantastic result. Now it's time to bring this product to market. Clarify looking to close recruitment over the next few months, and we're looking to bring that product to both of those markets over the next couple of years.
And just on co-PSMA, I mean, thinking about how that has helped not only sort of distinguish SARS PSMA as, a potentially better molecule for detection of cancer, how has it actually helped the phase 3 trials clarify and amplify, or, sort of raise the profile? Is that sort of what you're seeing?
Yeah, it's Amplify was recruiting so quickly already.
Mhm.
So, and the co-PSMA data is just reading out now. We obviously had the abstract out, and it's reading out shortly, and there's no surprises. But to have the detection level so high, almost 80% of those patients in that group, is phenomenal. But Amplify, the people already knew. Amplify was a bit different. We had to, and I don't think we'll ever see this again, we had to restrict sites on the number of patients because we couldn't have, particularly in imaging, sort of phase 3 clinical trial, we couldn't have them all done on one site. We could have on the numbers side, but we had to restrict that site back, and then the next site back, and the next site back, and the next site back. Before we know it, it's like, okay, we've gone out to a bunch, but we have to make sure these others come in. And key to us were two things. One was the diversity of cameras and, imaging groups and clinicians working with our products.
And do you have that diversity across?
We do, yes. And then the other one was we wanted to have Aussies.
Yep.
So, and not just one site in Australia, like Louise. So Louise did co-PSMA and was part of Amplify. So there's a lot of patients just there. We wanted to spread out at 2 other sites in Australia to make sure Aussies are getting part of this, because now, outside of Clarify, we don't have any clinical trials running in that space. We have all of this data reading out. Now it's time to get the product to market so people have access to it.
And just one question on the standard of truth for the BCR population, because I know that is sort of has been an issue. Can you just remind us how you're addressing the standard of truth?
It's quite interesting. It's never been an issue for us. It's been a position where competitors are looking for a differentiating factor. And we saw recently the response to co-PSMA. Like, they knew for some time that our product was better. We met the primary endpoint, yet the comments coming back were ridiculous. Imaging time on the camera, it's going to come out of the methods in a publication. And the other data, it's only a small niche part of the population. No, it's all the population we're looking at. We just had a trial which had a request. And even the analysts, one of the analysts came back and said, oh, there's a 3-week window between each image. There'll be so much more prostate cancer there then. Well, we've imaged it in Cobra. Like 6 months later, you can't find it with gallium. And just because there's a window, which you'd expect in every protocol, it doesn't mean it was imaged 3 weeks later.
Yep.
And that'll come out shortly in the publication, how short that time frame was.
Yep.
So these are sort of things where people start to nitpick.
Yep.
We didn't know how good we're going to be in Cobra. That was the issue. Now we do.
Yep.
And Amplify, the focus was to work with sites that were able to work through the standard of truth. Biopsy, right? The targeted therapy approach, or any other imaging modality, are very good ways of determining where the lesions are.
Yep.
So we've made sure that we work with sites, and this is also part of the recruitment process. We went through this process and still got, the trial done in 9 months on the recruitment side, but to make sure every site, we were validating that situation and making sure they're following up on the standard of truth.
The clinical side of things isn't the only consideration in radiopharmaceuticals. A big part is also the supply and the logistics. Given that you are sort of heading in towards the commercial phase of, Clarity, especially with SARS PSMA, Can you maybe touch on what the supply, the logistics, and sort of the considerations are as it relates to 64 copper in particular? Thinking about, if you're wanting to take such a large market, are you really sort of prepared in the next 18 to 24 months?
Yeah, it's a great question. Copper 64, if we take a little bit of the characteristics, which is key and I think very important. When we look at an isotope, the critical part is its half-life,
Mhm.
right?
Yep.
Because we're looking at positron emitters, and they're all great, and we do a comparison, and fluorine is a fantastic positron emitter. When we do a comparison to that, copper 64 is up there with pretty close to fluorine when they're just isotopes, and gallium is the worst of all. You
Yep.
know, so but in the context of a product, critical is the half-life and where you can get that product to and how you can image. The current standard of care imaging agents are 1 hour and 2 hour half-lives. Now, you don't have to be a scientist or a clinician or an engineer to understand that's a massive issue.
Mhm.
Gallium is a research tool that got ahead of itself. Okay. When we look at copper 64, we're looking at a 12.7 hour half-life.
Mhm.
We're looking magnitudes greater half-life with a product. Um, and it starts to build in something really interesting, a thing called shelf life,
Mhm.
which you'd expect products to have.
Yep.
There's very little shelf life to these other products,
Yep.
let alone an imaging window.
Mhm.
So now, and once again, we see the competitors start to worry about their situation and say the only thing important is a 1 hour half-life, 1 hour imaging time point. And that's just ludicrous in any part of cancer.
Mhm.
So what we did, remembering that there's two things that we did with our products. One is, and compared to the others, we built a superior product.
Mhm.
We built the SAR BIS PSMA, sarcophagene chelator, bispecific,
Mhm.
targeting PSMA. And we found the massive increase, 2 to 3 times the amount of uptake in the lesions at that 1 hour time point.
Yep.
But the most important thing we found was that a lot of the product was internalized
Mhm.
and stayed there over time. Suddenly, copper 64 enables later time point imaging, so then we can image at the optimal time as opposed to the limited time.
Yep.
So it's no longer in that context uh, isotope-centric medicine.
Yep.
It's patient-centric medicine.
Yep.
Now that feeds straight into the supply chain. We're very fond of what Lantheus has done. We hate the gallium model. Right? There's too many hands in to make their positions. You have to have gallium generators close to the patients, and we see, like for a company like Telix making so much revenue, not making any bottom line.
Mhm.
There's a lot of money going out, and Cardinal others have that position. Let alone all the mouths you have to feed along the way. Lantheus, we think, have a fantastic model.
Mhm.
Cyclotron generated isotope, even though it only has a 2 hour half-life, they're making very, very, very good margins. All of it transparent because they're making some big acquisitions that we knew weren't going to be successful, but they had lots of money to fund that. We love that model. So on that, we have the flexibility of not having one mechanism of generators near patients.
Mhm.
We have the options of a tiered approach.
Mhm.
And you've already started to see that come out,
Yep.
right? So the main one is the middle one at this point in time, the main commercial one, Spectron.
Yep.
Number of cyclotron facilities around the US. Just at one facility that we're currently working with now, because that's all we need, can make 400,000 doses of product a year from the one site.
Mhm.
That is the entire market as we're looking at this point in time. We think the market's a lot bigger,
Mhm.
obviously. So, but that's a great starting point. You've seen other manufacturing agreement like Nusano,
Yep.
and there'll be others that come out which are mass producers of copper 64. And then we can actually send that to CDMOs where more local manufacture and ship straight to the patient. All right. So that's the top one that does the entire of the US.
Yep.
We have a regional one, which is Spectron, and then we're going to have local presence at patient high throughput areas California and sort of the upper northeast in the US are the key areas of that.
Mhm.
But all we need is a cyclotron with solid targetry.
Mhm.
They're easy to come by, easy to find. And so that will be the local manufacturer. Suddenly we're able to not do what the others have done,
Mhm.
but have more of a large centralized manufacturer, a middle level of regional manufacturer, and then we can have local manufacture for the high throughput areas to cover wherever there's a PET camera in the US. No issues with short half-life, no issues with that isotope supply, them being a major logistical issue.
Mhm.
Now, when we couple that with the phenomenal efficacy, suddenly and people say, oh, there's room for everyone in the market. We don't see the room
Mm.
for products that fail efficacy. And when I say that on the sensitivity side, when they're missing so many patients, and we've seen that in Cobra and we've seen that in co-PSMA, we have the, completion of Amplify because there's such a high unmet need.
Mhm.
Of even, you had Oliver Sartor on and say that to a group of institutional
Yep.
shareholders, the million men in the US, and a lot of them aren't being served by current standard of care. We want to be ready.
Yep.
We want to be ready to go and launch into that market. We're ready now enough to deal with our clinical trials and to start to build out that commercial component.
Mhm.
You'll see some updates from us shortly on how we will go straight to market when it's time for us to be there.
And just on the cyclotrons, it's not just 64 copper that's made on those cyclotrons. Is there enough space to make 64 copper on those the existing cyclotrons in the US?
Yeah, so on some it will be, but once again the flexibility. So and it's an interesting point you raise because it's more of a competitor issue for us. The people are seeing fluorine,
Mm.
the market for fluorine, and those two products sort of cannibalizing each other
Yep.
on who has reimbursement or not. Now we've seen Lantheus play the same game that Telix did. There's no innovation in those areas. It's the same product,
Yep.
and they say, oh, it's a different formulation. Well, it's the same product. You're injecting the same product into the patient. You're getting the same outcomes, which is failed sensitivity.
Mhm.
But the problem with fluorine, it competes with FDG.
Yep.
We don't compete with FDG. You can make it, just say that it's made on the same cyclotron. You can make it in the afternoon, ship it overnight,
Yep.
and we have that shelf life. We don't have any issues or restraints on that. So it's a different model. And once again, as opposed to gallium, that gallium's been pushing to be made on cyclotrons, but can you you're making a 1 hour half-life, isotope on a cyclotron, then trying to get it to the patient. Um, sorry, 12.7 hours is a lot of time to do all that. Great opportunity. People have been making copper 64 for decades, particularly in the US. We work with one of those groups as part of our clinical trials that have been making it for 30, 40 years.
But there has been some issues previously for copper supply. Has that previously been just due to the lack of attention and what's changed now?
Copper 64 supply.
Yeah.
There's been no products in the market. So Curium brought a product to market, invested in Icon, now cater to that market.
Yeah.
There was a discussion that the Telix CEO said he bought the entire supply chain of copper 64, which is ludicrous
Mhm.
by every cyclotron with solid targetry. Curium are a good model.
Mhm.
The issue with Curium is they use a leaky chelator, so their imaging is less preferred.
Mhm.
But we sold them on copper 64 about a decade ago, and they took to it. It's just their agents are, they use off patent agents and expecting a good result. That's difficult to do. Copper 64, we're looking to take a very large percentage of the market.
Mhm.
Our goal is all of it. So that means now groups who are cyclotron focused, like Spectron and others, focusing on copper 64 manufacture. But if there's no products in the market, there's no copper 64 supply. But the making of it has been done for so long.
So SARS PSMA is not only a diagnostic, it's also a therapeutic. You currently have your secure trial ongoing, and that's currently in the cohort expansion phase. Maybe if you can provide an update and some background as to the design of that trial, the data that we might expect to see in the next sort of 6 and 12 months, and then sort of plans for the future.
Yeah, once it's, this SARBIS PSMA is so unique in the market. And it's unique in many different ways, but the innovation behind it first,
Mhm.
making a new molecule. But having the opportunity to use the same molecule for imaging and therapy is fantastic, just shifting the isotope, the perfect pairing, as we call it. Uh, but it's not the only part that we enjoy doing science. We love science.
Mhm.
And and for some reason, some of the market doesn't like science. This is in biotech.
Yep.
So we want to make sure our science is outstanding in order to win.
Mhm.
Um, and so when we went about doing a therapy trial, we wanted to make sure something critical that had been missed by the entire market, including, and this when we talk about the market, it's Pluvicto,
Yep.
and that's the number one player. That's the one we have to beat at this point in time. But we'll discuss another player which is of interest to us. That data came out recently. But in the Pluvicto setting, we want to be a Pluvicto buster.
Mhm.
And we've done the hard work to date to be that because we built a monomer, and it wasn't any good.
Mhm.
And then we built a bit superior product. That was the goal. Now, the other part we wanted to do was a dose escalation and dose optimization.
Mhm.
And we went through that process. 4 gigabecquerels, 8 gigabecquerels, 12 gigabecquerels, single dose. And we started to see even phenomenal data there,
Mhm.
even at the 4 gigabecquerel dose. The 8 gigabecquerels was amazing. And that's where we saw the first patient we ever dosed. What it was going to be a dose that we thought was going to be at least therapeutic was the 8 gigabecquerels. But to have a complete response in that first patient we ever treated at that level, it was an incredible result.
Mhm.
That patient lives today without cancer.
Mhm.
And this is a few years back.
Mm.
So, and then we're up in the 12 gigabecquerels, and we multi-dosed at the 12 gigabecquerels. And still, it didn't matter how hard we pushed, even at that 12 gigabecquerels. We see the Telix safety data come out recently, where there's 50% of the patients with heme tox above grade 3.
Mm.
We weren't even close. We had one patient with grade 4.
Mhm.
That's it. So the safety was there, but we started to push some safety parameters that we're not comfortable with. Group like Telix is comfortable with this, great. We would can the project if it was like that. And so our safety data was much better, but we wanted to make sure that it was incredibly safe
Mhm.
because we want to beat Pluvicto and the efficacy stacked up. And that's when we pulled it back at 8 gigs. And that 8 gigs now is being multi-dosed. And we've got a slightly different dosing regime
Mhm.
because even in the conversations you have with Louise Emmett and Oliver Sartor, the adaptive dosing schedule is far better.
Mhm.
Dosing when you need it is far better than just dosing up front.
Yep.
Okay? So, and I think the entire community is comfortable with that view. The issue that you have, if you have that, you can't run a trial because you don't know when you're going to dose. And then suddenly you have these, yes, OS is pushed out for years and years and years. And how do you actually make that work?
Yep.
So we've got something in between. It's between 6 weeks and then the sort of 12 weeks leading into an additional week. So 13 weeks, 6 to
Mhm.
13 weeks, you're dosing within that period of time, subject to how heme tox is going, how some other measures are going to make it absolutely safe to use is really the goal.
Mhm.
It's never going to be 100%, and we're even seeing some grade ones, but we see the grade ones reverse in the clinical trials. So that was our second goal: do some great science on the structure of the protocol, and then we've got a great molecule, great isotope, great structure, so that now the questions that we're asking, and the key one is, what is our phase 3 dosing going to look like?
Mm.
Now we're generating that data.
Mhm.
We work a little bit different to some organizations. We release our data as we go.
Mhm.
We had the safety review committee at the 8 gigs. Fantastic result today. We said there was another response where undetectable PSA
Mhm.
and undetectable PSMA in imaging. Fantastic. Our share price, I think, fell 20% on that because people don't seem to value miracles anymore. A patient has that sort of response
Mm.
and their AEs are in the grade 1 and get better is a miracle.
Mhm.
I'm a scientist saying that, so I don't believe in miracles. I believe in hard work, dedication, and focus, and attention to the patients, and that's the outcome we had. We just released then the 5th patient just recently, same outcome.
Mhm.
no PSA, and PSA is a very important factor as the first part. If there's no PSA, and all patients know this because they have a prostatectomy or definitive therapy, their PSA drops. The cancer is removed, it drops, right? Hopefully to zero. The patient group then it comes back because the cells are there, but then they're nascent for a period of time and they come out. And then we want to treat biochemical recurrence, but then when it gets worse, we want to treat with these therapies. To have that response in patients, you saw the amount of previous therapies that they had failed, some of which are blockbuster therapies, and we have that response in a patient with grade 1 AEs and they get better. It's a miracle. It's fantastic. Radiopharm is heading into that space. We want to make sure we have the best agent. We see Pluvicto as the best. We want to be a Pluvicto buster. That is our goal, and our data is stacking up. Even on the small number of doses, we're not doing 6 doses 6 weeks apart at this point in time because we're having these responses after 2, 3, potentially 4 doses. Incredible response. But we also are watching out for competing groups, competing products in the innovation phase. We saw the product release some data recently, was the Bayer group, the Trillium asset.
Yep.
Now, we like the group that invented that product, John Babbage and his group. They are very similar to us. They're the hard work at the benchtop, smart people. We've known each other for a long time, and they have an alpha asset, which the AEs are a little worse than ours, but the efficacy was looking good. And so when we're looking at ourselves in the market, we want to go as early as possible as a beta. And we want the concept, and it's something that, we've discussed internally a lot and also with our key opinion leaders. We want to hit like an alpha, but have the safety profile of the beta. This is something the alphas can't necessarily do. And certainly from the beta perspective, all we have is Pluvicto that made up a dose and ran with it. So our plan is to complete the expanded cohort. We'll get all of that data in. Recruitment is going well in that. We wanted to make sure that we measured the first patients at 8 gigabecquerels multidosing in case we have to change it. We have now confidence that that looks like the dose that we're going to use in a phase 3. We're going to run that out now, that trial, looking to close recruitment this year on that, and we'll look at the data. Then we'll make a call on what the phase 3 looks like and press forward with the phase 3. If our data is as outstanding as it is so far, then we're expecting the phase 3 to be relatively more on the smaller side rather than the larger side, because the difference can be seen in a smaller group of patients, and we'll keep our eye on the competition. As I said, we don't see a lot of competition, even though people say, I'm in PSMA, I'm this and that. Show us the data. Show us the efficacy data, then we know where we're at. And the only one that we can see that's in development at the moment was a recent one. But let's play. We think we've done the hard work there. Once again, when you're preparing for something, you've done it for so long, you build this level of confidence in your product. We did the hard work on the dosing. Now it's time to complete that trial and show the data.
Given this is the Science Hat podcast, I wanted to ask a couple of questions that I'm intrigued by. Thinking about the asset, the molecule, but the molecule coupled with the 67 copper, and you want to be a Pluvicto buster, what element do you think is most important to it being a Pluvicto buster?
Great question. The mechanism of action for radiopharmaceuticals is area under the curve. So the most important part is the amount of product you get in the lesion and how long it stays there. That was our original goal. We wanted to build a product because the PSMA agents had moderate uptake and then washed out. And we think it was because of the recycling of that receptor and how that binding occurs. Our goal was to overcome that. So in the basic work, we're able to achieve that out 2 to 3 times at the same imaging time point. But then it increased even over time. Now, the mechanism we found was a very large amount of the product internalizing. So when we look at the grassroots, what we're looking at is to actually have a more enhanced mechanism of action, more product in the lesion, and it stays there over time. So utilizing copper-67, it's a great isotope. We think the betas, as we said, was are safer in that context. Um, and that's purely over the punch.
Mhm.
Alphas hit hard.
Yep.
And we know there's offsite targeting with these agents. We want to hit softer on the tissues which are there to stay
Mhm.
and hard on the tissues that we want to go. So that massive amount of internalization in the lesions where there's a large amount of expression of the target is a great position to be in. We seem to be having that, and that's why we're having more the grade 1 responses on the AEs, but having an absolute killing effect on the lesions.
Yep.
That's what we see as the Pluvicto buster.
Yep.
Pluvicto hasn't necessarily done that level of work. There's a level of internalization work and dosimetry and the like, but we think that's the mechanism that we can overcome. Data will tell the story.
Yep.
We'll let the data shine. Let's finish the expanded cohort. 8 gigabecquerels, as we said, is a nice, safe amount. Multi-dosing at that with a slightly different dosing schedule. I think we've done the hard work. But you never know until you get into the grand final how you're going to perform. I think we've done the hard work at the moment to go up against these types of agents. And as I mentioned, we know where the competition, do we think antibodies are the way? No, they're not even close on the safety profile, and let alone nobody's showing efficacy.
Mhm.
Once we see this other data read out, then we'll know where we sit.
Mhm.
The data's looking really good so far. Remembering that we use the same agent as the diagnostic, and we know how good the diagnostic is.
Mm.
So that's just feeding the same agent into a therapy protocol. Yes, it's slightly different because we're dosing at much higher levels and, there's a few differences in that mix, but same molecule, same targeting.
And just finally on the therapy, there is a lot of competition in prostate cancer. Outside of, the radioligand therapies, there's also sort of the T-cell engagers. There's different, broader bispecifics and trispecifics. And patient recruitment is always the question. So you said secure, it's recruiting nicely. And, just thinking about in the future for a phase 3, you still feel confident in being able to recruit?
Yeah, it's a good question. Like when you develop new products, you can't constantly live in fear of someone curing cancer. We have a need to produce better products. And so when the Janux data come in, for instance, was that, I was getting messaged by an insto saying, oh, look, this, Alan, what's going on here? I said, it's early.
Mm.
Let's see how the data reads out. And then,
Mhm.
that came out.
Yep.
It was a little bit more in line with what our expectations were. So we can only do what we do.
Mhm.
We've done the hard work, as I said. We don't see anything at this point in time that's we're fearing to any great degree. I mentioned what we're keeping our eye on. There are other products, other mechanisms of action, which is fantastic for prostate cancer patients.
Yep.
And because you have another mechanism of action, it means you can potentially then still use our product in that patient group. But we would love to see better advances.
Mm.
I'm a scientist. I'm trying to make the world a better place. We want others to be part of that. If we were to monopolize there and just say, no, only use our product, or our product was so toxic, for instance, and then, patients can't use other products because of how toxic it is. And we're seeing, as I said, we're seeing that in some other products. And even some of the things we've seen in radiopharm, the J&J strategy, I think was terrible, to be frank. The outcome of that, yes, the hard work was done, the antibody was done, but an antibody with an alpha and the result that we had was terrible for the patients. We can do better. And I think the small molecule approach is working really well. What Pluvicto was there, we think Pluvicto is an okay product. It's good. It's a good first step. But can we do better? Yes. Are there other areas that are going to advance? Yes. And hopefully then in the overall development paradigm, we can reduce the side effects, which, considering that, first line therapy is blocking a man's testosterone, hopefully we can do that better with better products. And then increase the efficacy so that they can have the responses that we've seen in our patients, recently. Undetectable PSA, undetectable PSMA imaging, and adverse events in the grade 1 and get better, and have patients live for 3, 4, 5, 6, however many years without cancer is a fantastic outcome.
Clarity isn't only just a, one, or I should say 2 asset company. You do have a pipeline. It doesn't get as much attention. The focus has been on prostate cancer, but I'm well aware that the science that you've developed, the molecules that you've developed in the broader space are intriguing to me, and I hope others. Can you talk to sort of the pipeline? You've got a program in neuroendocrine tumors, a diagnostic asset there, but then also more broadly, what you kind of expect over the next couple of years.
So we are a science-based organization. So you'd expect we would leverage a platform as hard as we can,
Mhm.
diagnostically and theranostically.
Mhm.
The nets is with sartate.
Mhm.
We've seen the data there. We used a similar strategy, except we didn't optimize with a biospecific here.
Mhm.
We used ours and we went head to head.
Yep.
And the disco data was once again phenomenal. And we didn't need, because what we're looking at is not locking in a single time point just based on the isotope,
Mhm.
or just because we can image next day, it's next day is the best.
Mhm.
No, we optimize that. And it's just a few hours later,
Mhm.
the difference between sartate and the standard of care imaging. But the data was phenomenally different.
Mhm.
And we had an issue in that trial because we're detecting so many lesions that it was overwhelming sites,
Mm.
which was an incredible situation that we had to adapt to. But it was incredible.
Mhm.
And then when we followed up and did that trial, which was great, it was well controlled and the like, and followed up, the difference between the two agents was just phenomenal.
Mhm.
So that's great. Sartate's now, we've spoken to the FDA about it. We're progressing a phase 3 clinical trial. Not as many patients,
Yep.
70 patients. And we'll look to, get that done over the next couple of years as well and get that product in the market. Smaller patient population. It's not in the billions of dollars. It's in the hundreds of millions, but still a great follow-up. But science is great.
Mhm.
And moving into things like breast cancer, key to us. So moving out of prostate, and then NETs has been a big area for radiopharm already.
Yep.
Moving into breast cancer is exciting for us. Trastuzumab, that
Yep.
preclinical data was fantastic. We're not big fans of antibodies, but that's an amazing antibody.
Yep.
And we're hoping once again to produce some great efficacy, but looking at the adverse events
Mhm.
there is critical. Where there's an ADC approach
Mm.
at this point in time, and it's a good product,
Mhm.
but hopefully we can manage maybe those AEs a little better,
Yep.
and we'll see through science. We've taken the FAP approach. A few groups have done that. We didn't like FAP as a single targeting agent again.
Yep.
We went back to the benchtop. We reduced the bispecific. The uptake was great. But FAP is still finding its place in the world,
Mm.
and we'll see how that maps out. But we'll get that first in human. We'll see what that human data looks like, and then start to map out which approach we take. Now, the other areas, we think it's important for a company like us to look at alphas.
Mhm.
We just have some of the only people in the world that have commercialized an alpha.
Yep.
So we're a little bit more cautious on how to use alphas, and to make sure that we have a safe approach, which is critical, because we think quality of life is should be a key part of a patient's final months or years, and the alphas, if they're not highly specific, suffer quite significant side effects. But it doesn't mean we're not looking at it. We are. We've got an alpha program in place. We are looking at also some better chemistry around that. We think there's a lot more work that can be done on the alpha strategies,
Mhm.
and we are looking at those now, and to implement maybe a slightly different strategy, which would be really cool. We have been. I know it's a buzzword now. AI.
Mm.
We've been utilizing AI now for a couple of years.
Mhm.
More on the identification of targets, building new molecules, and the like. We have found, similar issues with AI as others.
Yep.
It speaks with the confidence of a young male,
Yeah.
and it's not always right.
Yeah.
And the problem with science is we need to validate. Every time we find something, it's not good enough to be theoretical. You know how we work?
Mm.
We need to validate these targets. We've had some success in that, and hopefully we see some of that come to the fore in the not too distant future. But there are some hiccups in the use of AI we've found.
Mm.
And it's going to be interesting to see how that strategy unfolds. But there's very few groups that are doing the type of innovation we're doing.
Mm.
You know, we see the radio farm market being dominated by old assets.
Mm.
We think there's so much improvement that can be done with a new way of thinking about, we've got a platform technology, so we can run all of our products through the platform, which is very unique. We're not in a whole bunch of isotopes, which all individually need supply chains. Actinium is one of those.
Mm.
Actinium still needs to build its supply chain.
Mm.
How that gets going is going to be interesting. The other isotope, like lead,
Mm.
10-hour half-life is a very short half-life for a therapy, and it's a lot of energy that you've got sitting there in a generator,
Mm.
close to the patient. We find, and it's great that people are asking that question. We hope there's some success there. Can we treat cancers better? Yes.
Yep.
But we find there's a lot of science that still needs to be done there. We'll be looking at strategies where we're, the supply chain, like copper-67, linear accelerators. Invest in linear accelerators, you make more copper-67.
Yep.
The science is done. But looking at these other isotopes, there's still a bit of work. So we'll see how that pans out. There's a lot of things that we're doing, though, in that preclinical discovery, and then looking at some pure chemistry work. And hopefully we can release a few of those things to the market in the not too distant future.
And I imagine it's quite difficult because you're sort of balancing half-lives with chemistry, with targets, and trying to identify all of these things. If you had to pick a new sort of indication, so you've got prostate, NET, and breast cancer that you've kind of released either clinical or preclinical data on, is there a cancer that you kind of see as quite you could target with a better target with a radioligand therapy as an obvious candidate?
Yeah, it's a great question. There's a lot of cancers we would love to do better.
Mm.
The issue around some of the cancers, I'll give an example,
Mhm.
because it's easier that way, and then we can talk around. We would love to head into more difficult cancers like brain cancer,
Mm.
but it comes with issues.
Mm.
The blood-brain barrier, which is there to protect us, actually doesn't do us any good
Mhm.
in the situations where we have a brain cancer and the blood-brain barrier stays intact.
Mhm.
We are looking at potentially some mechanisms in which we can pass the blood-brain barrier with, with a product similar to ours. And if we can overcome that strategy, that's fantastic. But
Mm.
it's such a difficult question to ask,
Mm.
particularly in the context of the public markets or things
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
So we were in neuroblastoma,
Yeah.
and we had the issues there, like really small patient
Mm.
population and the sickest of sickest patients.
Mm.
Were dosing at such high levels of SARTATE, which still had a fairly good safety profile, even at the high doses. We never dosed patients with that high dose to see whether we can drive a therapeutic effect. One of the patients, unfortunately, was really sick
Mm.
with a brain lesion and passed away. And then suddenly it looks like it's part of the trial. There was a discussion whether it's part of the trial or was it our product, and couldn't decide which one was which because of the sick patient. So sometimes they have to be balanced, in particular when you're in the capital markets and where you go, which
Mm.
I think is it means you don't take the risks that you'd want to take in trying to develop these products for broader humanity
Mm.
who may benefit from it. But the key things for us are high unmet need,
Yep.
an ability for us to be efficacious, and to look at when we look at the high unmet need in a large population, which can work with the current paradigm of therapy. Really, that's what we're looking for. And there's a few areas that we are focused on now to see whether, there's a target there. What's the expression like?
Mhm.
What is really the current treatment paradigm for it, and to see whether we can have some change there. And I'm excited about some of the things that are in development.
So markets have been pretty volatile over the last few years, but sort of more increasingly over the last 12 months. Clarity as a pre-revenue biotech is probably more susceptible than sort of most other sectors. How have you sort of managed that? How does the company kind of just progress through its clinical trials?
Yeah, it's certainly been the case. Just thinking back, we listed in 21 and remembering then interest rates started to go up. It was a disaster for biotech
Mhm.
around the world.
Mhm.
We weren't alone, but we raised a lot of money at that point in time and we're in a good position. But the volatility
Mm.
seems to be getting worse and worse. We're down 10% on a day and up 12% the next day. It's incredible. It's incredible. And it's more from the perspective of who would be an investor with that sort of volatility. Now, the issue that we have, that in particularly I have in this context of building a company in this sort of market is we're developing long term assets
Mhm.
and we require capital and the like from investors that have very short term measures.
Mhm.
Daily, some of those mark to market daily,
Mhm.
and every day it's updated on a website. And so I feel sorry for the institutional shareholders that have that. I don't have that time frame. I have the time frame of build value from the bottom up,
Mhm.
not measure what the right time to come into the market or out is.
Yep.
And so our goal is to continue to build that from the ground up. We have a lot of shareholders who are employees of our organization, and that group now owns quite a significant amount of the company. We have people who've been there for a long time from when it was an idea
Mm.
as a company to where we are today. They've had, quite significant, uplifts in the value that they
Mhm.
have, which is terrific. But when I look at how things are panning out, and it's different for every shareholder because people put them into general groups.
Yep.
I've seen institutional investors day trade.
Mhm.
I've seen retail have long term views and have succeeded significantly off that. In the day trading environment, it's a zero sum game.
Mm.
One side will win, one side will lose. We know that. That's how the maths works because there's no real change in position or value. Um, and to see how that feeds through, we have now a lot of, and we've always been, and we always market to, or have communication with institutions.
Yep.
It comes from my background of, some now a quarter of a century in the markets. That's always been the focus. Our focus hasn't been retail.
Mhm.
We find the retail following comes from building a great company.
Mhm.
But that doesn't mean the retail aren't affected then by volatility and the things that go on. And we see that dynamic happening all the time.
Mhm.
I think biotech, pre-revenue biotech, it's certainly an acquired taste. When you're on the risk, when we look at the paradigm, it is at the far risky end. Developing drugs pre-revenue
Yep.
is at the pointiest end. And I remember going to a lunch in the city and discussing this, and there's another one coming up at one of the big end of town investment banks, and they have a healthcare day. And I was sitting in that room. It's, we don't have this view in Redfern, but sitting in the room looking over the harbour, and I was looking at the boats, and I had all these institutional investors and the banks talking about the environment.
Mm.
And so they're deciding if it's going to be sunny tomorrow, whether they should be on our boat or not. Right? We're on the boat.
Yep.
We don't have any alternative.
Yep.
We're not getting off the boat.
Yep.
They're deciding whether in or out of interest rates going on, or this is happening, or this, or whether things are going bad in Iran or not, has nothing to do with what's happening in the boat itself. It happens with the environment in which we exist.
Yep.
Pre-revenue biotech is at that pointy end. So retail will always blame the company
Mm.
if the share price falls down or whatever. Oh, it's taking too long clinical trials. Oh, it's doing this with no insight, but
Mhm.
speak with authority on stuff that they don't know.
Yep.
Now, I want to give some compliments to it. I didn't know, and it's interesting watching something like Hot Copper.
Mm.
I never paid a lot of attention to hot copper except for maybe on a Friday night, grab a glass of wine and have a look at who's commenting and who's close or not. And there's some brilliant people, I must say, that are part of that hot copper mix. And some of them email me directly, and I correspond and say, I find it incredible the amount of insight you have with imperfect information.
Mhm.
I've always been a big fan of that. Coming from a science background, you have imperfect information. You're trying to work out, due to some statistical, significance, whether something's going to happen in the future or not. And what they were able to nail just off the back of public information, I think, is fantastic. Some of those people, others can't spell, so it becomes a real situation, particularly when you're looking at competing, companies, shareholders talking on ours, and it's you've got that mix of people. If you can't spell, you're not going to find, the high impact factor journals where our stuff is published, where it shows all the stuff that you're saying that we don't have.
Yep.
You're not going to have that insight into the markets. You're not going to know the threat we present
Mhm.
to other companies with the development of an asset which is so much better, so much more efficacious.
Mhm.
So this dynamic is still part of the financial markets.
Yep.
There's a level of institutions. Some have a high level of insight, as you know, Maddie, because you're an analyst, a very bright analyst that covers our space. The institutions have that mixed level of knowledge. You get larger institutions; they have no level of knowledge in the biotech space, and just look, do you have revenue?
Yeah.
Yes, you do. Tick the box. So it's such a crazy market. But you know what? I love it.
Yep.
It's part of it. I have people that, dislike me on hot copper. I have people that like me, and it's all a mixed thing. And suddenly you're in this sort of game, but it's no game for us.
Yep.
We're here, pre-revenue biotech. We're always that. Our goal was to build, irrespective of what other people's um, timelines are on investment or where they're at, to grow the most successful drug developer in Australian history in that context, that has built its whole model off the back of patents out of a university.
Mhm.
That has been our whole thing. That's why I did it. This is why a lot of our team do it, to do that. And we haven't stopped. We have a moment in time now, and if everyone's judging us today, great. We came from nothing, an idea 12 years ago. We had no BIS PSMA until about 7 years ago.
Mhm.
We've done it from scratch, and that is our model. We haven't grabbed, something overseas that someone else didn't want and just flog it to the market, or something that was around in the 90s and try and develop that. No. We built all of our products from scratch,
Mhm.
our technology from scratch, and we're heading down that path. That's our philosophy. Science, driving this with longer term views
Mhm.
of taking the entire market, and to have such a competitive position. If that fits into your model, join us as shareholders. If it doesn't, we trade all the time, and there's opportunities for people to buy and sell into a company like Clarity. I love it. I have a fair position. Our team has a fair position.
Yep.
We love what we do every day, and the results are substantiating all of our hypotheses about what we're able to do. Firstly, as scientists, then as commercial, and we're moving now towards commercial, and that's exciting.
I'm intrigued as well, I think, by the fact that historically, we're focused on the Aussie landscape, the ASX. But I think, we can probably all agree that biotech and healthcare more broadly is probably led by the US. I think, there's a stat in the XBI sort of outperformed the S&P 500 over, the 5-year increments forever, up until the 2020 to 2025 period, where the XBI probably did nothing. And the S&P 500, sort of outperformed based on that. Has your experience sort of over the last, thinking about the massive sell-off that happened in about April last year once Trump came in, and, there was all of these changes in the FDA, there was a broader market sell-off, but in particular the healthcare names have been, really hurt. Have you seen a change in sentiment over the last kind of 6 months, with a little bit more increasingly sort of risk on interest in biotech? It's more of a value play now, which is not usually the case with healthcare. I'm interested if you've noticed that.
Yeah, it's so it began. I was in the US at an investment banking function
Mhm.
when the current president was elected,
Mhm.
and the XBI was substantially affected even then.
Yep.
let alone when there was a new FDA
Yep.
lead and who had views that were contrary to science
Mhm.
and continues to have today, even though they're not in our space. Oncology is a little bit different than vaccines, but it substantially affected the amount of funding in the US.
Mm.
And some of those groups went under because of the drawdown on funds
Mhm.
into the biotech space. We were affected by it because even though we've never done a capital raising with US
Mhm.
investors, we had a large amount of US investors on our register who bought on market.
Yep.
So that was a substantial change that we were part of. That April was, I think, the nadir for us.
Yep.
We hit about $1.43,
Mm.
and and then we had to focus on fighting our way out. And we've always fought, whether it was post the IPO where we were sub 40 cents,
Mhm.
but it had nothing to do with our company. Even though, once again, retail always attacked the company,
Mm.
always attacked myself as the face of the company, and that's fine.
Mhm.
But institutions just sell or buy or whatever, depending on the weather.
Mhm.
So on that basis, we still have it, and we fell to that $1.43. We had to build towards. Okay, how do we survive here? We changed the strategy. We got rid of the high risk, low reward assets of kids. And I say that in a really, heartfelt way. Kids
Mm.
that shouldn't be low reward, should
Mm.
be substantial. But from a commercial perspective, it's a lot more difficult. And focused on our priority assets and extended our cash runway.
Yep.
That saw a little bit of a recovery in the space.
Yep.
We were able to execute on a few dynamics that were going on in the market at the time of the second half of the year, started the second half of last year. We were able to do that capital raising of north of $200 million at a premium to the last close, substantial premium to where we were trading over the last 12 months.
Mm.
And that was great. Now it's put us in a very strong position.
Mhm.
And then the dynamics since then, it's still volatile.
Mm.
We've been went up and then it came back. Our day-to-day fluctuations are somewhat irrelevant to us unless we're implementing a transaction. That's when we're locking something in. But it's critical. I don't want to see any shareholders lose money.
Mhm.
And so those market dynamics are shareholders fighting against each other.
Yep.
It hasn't got anything to do with us. And people say, oh, the clinical trial took longer to recruit. Well, no, you don't have any information on that. We just showed how fast, or just recently, how fast the recruitment process was.
Mhm.
And that dynamic's happening all the time. Just because we don't speak to the market, because we can't update the market for no reason,
Mhm.
it doesn't mean the recruitment isn't going really well. But they'll attack the company straight away. That's fine. Attack us. We don't care. I got broad shoulders. I can handle that.
Yep.
And from the dynamic of some people, they just take a negative view. I don't mind. We're here to build a company.
Mhm.
We're here to take a longer term view. We're here to do the hard work. If people don't want to do the hard work, maybe clarity is not for them.
Mhm.
We're here to do the deep dive on the science, which we've done. We've built a molecule that we see generating superior position
Mhm.
in diagnostics by far. 2 to 3 times the efficacy. It's like a whole new modality, but it's not. We're going to use the same PET cameras. We're going to do everything the same. Even these products that fail detecting disease on the new superior cameras,
Yep.
we detect with ours on a regular camera.
Mhm.
And that data will read out. It'll come. We've seen it happen. And we need to stick to our game plan. No matter what's happening in the markets, we need to be paddling like hell
Mm.
on the pre-revenue biotech boat
Yep.
until we become commercial. And that's in the not too distant future. And then that shifts to de-risking us a little more. But we see the risk which the revenue companies have had.
Yep.
They've come off more than us.
Yeah.
And I think for good reason.
Mm.
Because they have one revenue stream and significantly under attack, and we're looking to head into that, but not rest on our laurels in building a radiopharm company.
The other element to markets is, and with the pre-revenue biotechs being sort of undervalued compared to historical levels, is that it makes them really interesting to strategics who want to enter into the space. Radiopharmaceuticals is a bit of a a niche area, or it has historically been a bit niche because you've got this element of a diagnostic and a theranostic. Not everyone wants to be in diagnostics. And then also it's just the logistics and supply side of radiopharmaceuticals is a new kind of concept to most big pharma players. So, I mean, just maybe your sort of high level thoughts on how you're seeing the strategic interest into the space. It was very hot a couple of years ago. It's somewhat died off, but I kind of think it's growing a little bit again. I see kind of the activity in the US around some of the new IPOs and kind of the plethora actually of radiopharmaceutical companies. But yeah, just what your thoughts are and sort of who the key players and who are now and maybe in the future.
Yeah, that was a fascinating time. I can't believe what happened
Mm.
during that period of time, and but it was great to see, and it was great to see all these companies trying to get a position.
Mm.
Now we move on, a couple of years from that, and the big ones, like Novartis is the market leader. They generate the most revenues from their products in radiopharmaceuticals, and that is off the back of Pluvicto,
Yep.
a beta emitter of all
Yep.
things. And they have a small diagnostic program that they've decided to keep,
Yep.
which is an interesting strategy because there is so much money to be made in diagnostics,
Yep.
interestingly enough. And there's a couple of groups which are interested in the diagnostic space itself, but therapy, there needs to be a therapy component to it.
Mm.
But the strategies have been fascinating. BMS's strategy, so to make a $4 billion US dollar plus
Yep.
transaction on dotatate for the second time, like dotatate was sold twice, once for the beta, once for the alpha.
Yep.
And to implement that strategy, it'd be fascinating to how that plays out. There's offsite targeting with that asset, we know,
Yep.
but they desperately wanted to get into the space. BMS are one of the smaller big farmers,
Yep.
and they will need to do something, and we'll see how that plays out. Eli Lilly was one that stepped in. They're on the other scale, end of the scale of big pharma. They bought points assets. There's not much there anymore. We knew that trial was going to be less good as Pluvicto because they were dosing less.
Mhm.
We spoke about earlier, what's the mechanism of action? That area under the curve, you reduce the area under the curve, you're going to reduce the efficacy. It was an interesting strategy, but they took the view it was a unpatented product.
Mm.
Even though there is a patent fight over that with Novartis and the like. So it was an interesting strategy, but Eli Lilly spent not an insignificant amount of money,
Yeah.
and they don't have anything to show for it. But they are a big company; they're going to do very well. There's such a massive organization in other areas, but they need to make investment.
Yep.
And they need to come up and looking at some of the transactions, like Bayer is coming back.
Yep.
Lovely to see them. They're in diagnostics and therapies.
Mhm.
They have the Trillium asset that we spoke about earlier, which the efficacy looks okay.
Yep.
They're using an alpha strategy. So they're an interesting player. They're the first to move. A number of our team were with them
Yep.
after the Argida acquisition.
Yep.
And it'll be interesting to see how they play and whether they're given that freedom now after the Monsanto issues that they've had to deal with and had a lot to chew on that. But it'll be interesting to see how they play moving forward. J&J have to do something.
Mhm.
They've tried. It
Mhm.
hasn't worked out so well. They've got a target that they fell in love with, and hopefully that pans out for them. But they need a bigger strategy than single assets. And there's some now that have, we've got these patent cliffs coming on and no exposure. And so it'll be interesting to see how some of those others play out. AstraZeneca hit pretty hard with Fusion.
Yep.
They were using, once again, an unpatented molecule. Be interesting to see how that, competes, or the data, when the data comes out, how it competes with the Trillium asset, for instance, where I know John Babbage, did a fair bit of work on and expecting it to be a better asset. So those things will play out. What do I think is the future for a big pharma? There needs to be a beta and alpha strategy.
Yep.
That is critical. I would suggest there needs to be a diagnostic strategy. If you have those three areas, you become a complete radiopharmaceutical offering.
Mhm.
The only group that has that really at the moment is Novartis. When we look at that, they're trying to develop alphas and in the PSMA space, for instance. They have the number one beater in the space, and they have a very small diagnostic component, but can build upon that, certainly through acquisition if they needed. And that's it. That's the only one that's taken that approach to date. As I said, Bayer do have diagnostics and they do have therapies, so they're the one that can really follow on from that. It'll be interesting to see how it pans out.
Do you think that all of them are receptive to radiopharmaceuticals, just considering it's a different conversation around supply and logistics?
Not all of them. Some are just, focused on their areas, which they should be.
Yep.
Radiopharm is very oncology focused. And if you don't have a big play in oncology, then why be in it?
Mhm.
But it's interesting, even Novartis's approach, which didn't have any assets really in prostate.
Yeah.
But then you see the big players in prostate, the J&Js and the Pfizers.
Pfizer, yeah. Yeah.
And Pfizer are asleep at the wheel when it comes to radiopharm, even though they've brought in the new Novartis. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. And we mentioned J&J. J&J are a massive player in the prostate space. They've tried with an asset and haven't succeeded. It'd be interesting to see how they play now moving forward. I think it's a very important modality for these players in oncology or prostate. They need those assets, particularly when they've got all the other capabilities within that space. But look, we're excited. Look, if I discuss us, my goal at Clarity was to build a company from scratch on the back of provisional patents and become the number one player in that space. Very, very few Australian companies have even done what we've done so far today. Right? Complete the recruitment of phase 3 clinical trial for asset. There has been some with Australian assets. I'm only talking about Australian assets.
Yep.
There's been a few that obviously have done well, like Neuron, our friends at Neuron, and Mesoblast. Like they've got products to market, but they're not Australian derived. There's very few that have done it. I don't fly the flag too much as a patriot, but I'm very, very proud Aussie, particularly in the science space, and I'm very keen to see that through.
Yep.
Whatever happens, though, we are constantly monitoring the market. We're constantly in communication with strategics and the like, but there is a lot of money to make out of diagnostics in the first instance. I don't think I'll ever see an opportunity like this where we are so far better than standard of care. And you know how we know that? The response of our competitors.
Yep.
We are so far ahead that we're looking to take a very large percentage of a massive market. And that's a thrill for all of our team to do that. But we are in a dynamic, acquisitive area as pharma and biotech. It's going to intensify because of patent cliffs and issues. Does a big pharma want even one asset that produces billions of dollars? People are making acquisitions on hundreds of millions of dollars of peak revenue. What about billions of dollars in high margin on a diagnostic strategy?
Yep.
Let alone the therapy strategy, let alone the opportunity to use their own targets and moieties and the like with a platform opportunity. So some things are taken out of my personal hands and will be with our shareholders as a whole. I am a shareholder as well, as you know. And we come together to see what's in the best interest of the company and of all our shareholders. But if you don't have this fight, if you don't have this drive and this excitement, it's a tough job to have. And I love it every day.
And just thinking about the kind of how you structure those, we've seen a lot more, we've seen an increase in sort of licensing rather than sort of whole company acquisitions. So a lot of licensing deals. Are all of those up for grabs, just in broad terms for Clarity?
So the key groups that we think about opportunities to, let's use the term collaborate, are the ones that we're looking to take their market. And I say, and I have these reach outs from our competitors, as you know, and in sometimes very weird and bizarre ways. What is the offering of those companies relative to us? They typically have a sales force. Yes, well done, tick the box. What we have found in salespeople, they're wonderful people that want to make lots of money in a very short amount of time. Yep. How do you do that? With the next product coming on. We don't have any problems attracting those sorts of people. We've actually increased our commercial group. We've got the former Novartis commercial team who launched Pluvicto, which is great. Both of them. So Bryce Cantor's been with us for some time.
Yep.
And Chris Horvath's just recently come on board, even though we've known him for the last few years. He went to other company like Point, where it was closer to market, and he was part of that Point. He was part of Point when it was acquired. Our key focus with those ones that might want to play a little bit, they're not much bigger than us.
Yep.
They can't do much anymore. They've been somewhat, crippled by the markets and the market and the market's view of their assets.
Yep.
And we think we can do a lot better ourselves.
Yep.
When it becomes larger companies, there are larger companies which are in the diagnostic space. It'd be interesting to see how that evolves, because they are looking at becoming larger radiopharm groups.
Yep.
In what I would call the mid pharma as opposed to big pharma, but the big pharma is so big now,
Yep.
and licensing like BIS PSMA.
Mm.
Does that make sense? I wouldn't think so. We don't have problems raising capital. We don't have problems with building our team. We don't have problems, in any part of that clinical plan that we've had to date. You never know what's going to happen in commercialization, but we're feeling very good about that. We've got the right team and increasing the size of our team, obviously, and we want to build a sales force at the right time. We feel really good about where we are right now in that. But you never know. And the dynamics are still hot, and things are moving along. We'll see how that plays out. Either way, we're set.
Yep.
We're in a strong position as a standalone company with multiple assets, and really the key being, to market in the next small amount of time.
Yep.
But if it so happens that it makes more sense from a shareholder perspective to move into, hands with a lot more funding, a lot bigger in context, then we have to make those decisions.
And just because I know it comes up a lot, and I noticed that when all of that radiopharma sort of M&A activity happened, people pointed to the fact that they'd had sort of the supply and logistics side, kind of set up. Do you think that that's important to have that really well established so it doesn't scare any of the pharma players off? And, maybe just touching on what you're doing in the next little bit of time on the copper 64 and 67 side.
Yeah, it's interesting. We know from the BMS experiment that not everything was in place, which was fascinating. It's a halt to clinical trial a couple of months after the acquisition. I wonder who lost their job over that.
Yep.
So what people say they have and what they do have are probably two different things. Setting up a warehouse with a radiation sticker out the front is not a radiopharm facility.
Yep.
Ours is a little bit different, our model. Copper 64 supply, it's understood. There's already cyclotrons making copper 64 in the US, commercial cyclotron facilities making copper 64 in the US and making our products. Copper 67, we're the leader in the space in copper 67.
Yep.
Have a couple of organizations using different technologies.
Yep.
One built it from the ground up, Alinak, John Stoner, who we love dearly out of Idaho, and still making a copper 67 today. And phenomenal grade copper 67 off the back of Linux, which costs next to nothing to make.
Yep.
So a facility isn't actually that expensive to make copper 67. We had North Star invest in rotatrons and that capability as well. When it was producing copper 67, it's really good for our clinical trials, and great group to work with. And there's some others now, like Nusano, looking to make copper 67 as well. And that's terrific moving into the phase 3 clinical trials. Will we, when people are looking at these models, will we invest in infrastructure and capability ourselves? The answer is definitely maybe. So we do like some of the technology around copper 67 and the like. So we'll see.
It's a pretty unique isotope that's not been sort of done before.
And it gives us the opportunity for that complete vertical integration, which who has that? Novartis are relying on aging nuclear reactors and third-party suppliers. We won't have to rely on any of that as a company. So from a security of supply perspective, that's fantastic. On the diagnostic side, there's no reason for us to make copper 64. There's so many groups that can manufacture and make our product there. So those are in place. And as I said, we look to build out that capability further, so we're ready to go on launch in what we expect to be a large market from day one. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
Final question. Are you bullish on biotechs in the next 12 months?
General biotechs?
Yeah, just
Biotech
general.
space.
Yep.
Do you know, I hope there's a number of biotechs in Australia that I hope thrive.
Yep.
We're starting to really show, and I'm proud that Clarity was part of this, to the markets that we have a viable biotech sector here in Australia.
Yep.
The reason why, I shifted into this and to do this was that when I was in investment banking, smallest deals we did were 10 million up to 100 million, which wiped out the entire Australian market.
Yep.
Nowadays, we're seeing more of those in excess of that amount,
Yep.
including ourselves. So seeing groups do really well, PYC with a big transaction recently, and some others, Neuron, I mentioned before, I love the team there. The Mesoblast team now are doing some great work. Now talk about resilience.
Yep.
Silvio and the team have been there for a long time building that company, and so proud of them. And so it's terrific to see those companies survive and thrive.
Yep.
There's some smaller ones now. I love cancer therapeutics that are struggling just on the capital side, and they have to fight the capital markets and some other things to get through. I hope they do really well.
Yep.
They're very, very small market caps at the moment, trying to run therapy programs. It's a difficult model, and I know some great people who are heading up those organizations. I hope they do really well.
Mhm.
When capital is the issue, I get anxiety about it because it means that the products might be fantastic, but it's the flow of capital.
Yep.
With us, we've never had to have any significant issues around capital. For my misspent youth as an investment banker, paid off for something, and as a company, we've been able to capital raise all the way through. And I hope some of those companies are able to access some good capital so they can actually complete some great initial efficacy trials to see if those products are viable.
Completely agree.